What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another Mock Draft Monday. Today's mock draft is on Yahoo, I think for the first time this offseason, and we're excited to bring it to you. Now, I'm going to be drafting from the 7th spot. My strategy just for this first round or two, I want to grab 2 RBs. This is a standard league, so 20 receptions, 60 receptions really means nothing. It's going to hurt those guys like Jarvis Landry. It's going to hurt those guys like Golden Tate. It's going to hurt those guys like Christian McCaffrey. All these guys that are, in the first round RBs, Kareem Hunt, Melvin Gordon, Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, they're all viewed relatively similarly in standard. A guy who's really going to take a hit is Saquon Barkley. We know that Barkley may lose some goal line work to Jonathan Stewart, and he's also a superior pass catching back. It also narrows the gap between Le'Veon Bell, Gurley, Zeke, and DJ. I think they're also all very close. Zeke, normally you would give the benefit for standard leagues because he's not a big pass catcher, but he's really heavily involved in the offense. But you have to question his scoring opportunity, and in standard, touchdowns are everything. So there's the music. We're going to get right into it, and I'm going to start with the stat of the day. So Friday's stat of the day, which receiver had the least amount of air yards? Which top 24 receiver had the least amount of air yards? It was Golden Tate. Brandon Love, good job on that one. Now in that video, I also talked about quarterbacks and doing things well, as in like the easy passes, the in a clean pocket, the high completion throws. Which quarterbacks can do that? Well, I said Baker Mayfield, Dak Prescott. These were really young guys that were really able to do that well, and it normally translates to the NFL level, and they find success easier and quicker than some of their other types of quarterbacks that also come into the league that maybe aren't as good at those certain areas. Now, which quarterback is the lowest rated quarterback from a clean pocket? So out of all quarterbacks last season, which one graded the lowest from a clean pocket? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins. My pick is coming up. Like I said, not really looking to get Saquon. I'm not really looking to get Kamara, especially Kamara. I'd love to think that he's going to have the ability to score often. He had a ton of touchdowns last season, but I'm not looking for him. I'm going to go for Melvin Gordon here. So I do have Saquon Barkley I could pick up. I have Barkley ranked a little bit lower in standard. I think he's excellent in PPR, but I love to have Gordon. He's on an amazing offense that has only improved. They were 4th in total yards last year, and they didn't reach the end zone as much as they should have, but they don't really have some solid red zone weapons. If you notice in the red zone, they had to look a lot into Keenan Allen's direction. Normally, they don't usually do that. Now, they have Mike Williams, who you've seen crawl and climb up draft boards. He could be a red zone weapon, but we haven't really seen it that much. We know this team's going to be throwing a lot. It's going to be pushing the ball down the field extremely well. So we're going to just go for the better offense, or at least more proven offense, and that would be with Melvin Gordon. My next pick, I'm going to look to shore up that running back spot up again. Devontae Freeman. I'd like Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook. These are all players I would really be interested in. I would go a receiver if one of the top guys did fall far enough. Devontae Adams is a great standard receiver. Julio Jones, I see, is still available. I think he is a decent pick in the 2nd round, especially considering I picked 7th. So to kind of match him up with a Melvin Gordon. But right now, I have my eyes on Leonard Fournette and Dalvin Cook. Now, depending on who this guy takes, I'm going to get my choice between one of those two. And it looks like I still have my choice of both. Now, if this was PPR, it would be a super easy decision. I would be going for Dalvin Cook all day. But I'm just going to go with Leonard Fournette because it's standard, and you do have to make those pivot plays from time to time. It's so difficult to separate your rankings when you're going from PPR to standard. But I'm going to draw the line in the sand. I also very closely rank Melvin Gordon and Dalvin Cook similarly. I think that they're both on offenses that are great. They're both going to be used in the red zone, and I could really see their production being extremely similar. So having either one of those guys on your team, you're going to be starting off well. Leonard Fournette, he does tend to get a rap for being a little bit more risky. I can understand that. Now, there is Corey Grant, who's on that team, who, if you actually look into how he grades out and how he's been doing, he's been playing extremely well. And if the Jaguars are smart, they're going to use him more often. Now, the only reason I would draft Leonard Fournette over Cook is just overall usage. Now, he does come with that increased injury risk, but you know for a fact he is going to be on the field. Dalvin Cook, on the other hand, we know that Latavius Murray's there, and he can't get 20-30 touches per game. What happened last year when he got 20-30 touches per game? He ended up getting injured. Now, what's really going to help this team take that next step forward and make it maybe from the championship game to the Super Bowl? They brought in Kirk Cousins, but no, they need to keep Dalvin Cook healthy. Now, we saw what they were able to do with Jerick McKinnon and Latavius Murray, giving them both mild workloads, you could say, modest workloads, you could say, but not overly heavily relying on one over the other. I think they're going to need to spell some carries away from Cook this year, whereas Fournette, I really just don't think they care. They're trying to just run the ball and jam it down the opponent's throats. Leonard Fournette's going to get a ton of touches regardless of how injury prone he is. Now, I'd actually say if you could get Leonard Fournette as like the 12th pick in a standard league draft, I don't think that you're doing that bad. Because I mean, if you're smart, you're taking running backs on running backs on running backs. Maybe for all the first round picks except for Antonio Brown, because realistically, the running backs in standard just score so much more. So if you're getting Leonard Fournette in the back of the first round, I can't fault you either. I got him in the second. So I do like that pick. Now, I do need to get a receiver. I have two players on my board that I'm interested in right now. I would like to have Jordan Howard. I would also like to have Tyreek Hill. Now, grabbing Jordan Howard here does have its benefits, because I would basically have all of my running backs shored up, and I could really just draft some late round flyers and call it a day. Maybe one more guy in the mid round to kind of just have a little bit of safety in case any one of these guys had an early injury. But a player like Tyreek Hill has such a big impact in a standard league. He makes most of his production on big plays. Now, he does have what most people would consider bust potential, because the efficiency to where he had his fantasy finish was really different. If you go by how many targets he received and how high he ranked in fantasy amongst other receivers, he ranked extremely high on a very few targets. But unlike Marvin Jones, who also ranked very similarly as Tyreek Hill, Tyreek Hill's just a freak. You know, Tyreek Hill is easily able to continue to produce those types of big plays. He's easily going to be able to produce regardless of who the quarterback is, because he's one of those guys, just get the ball in his hands and he's going to do the rest. Okay, so back to the draft board. My pick's up in 2, and I'm really loving a couple receivers here, and that's Alshon Jeffrey and Josh Gordon. Now, I do have Josh Gordon ranked much higher than Alshon Jeffrey, just for informational purposes to let you guys know. But I do want to mention, while I have him here, that I do think Alshon Jeffrey is a much better player in standard. If you notice, the Eagles offense, they didn't put up a ton of yards, at least from the quarterback position. They did well in that area, but what they really did was had really high efficiency at turning those red zone opportunities into touchdowns. Alshon Jeffrey was a guy who had a ton of touchdowns last season. I'm just going to take a look at some running backs here before I do, but Alshon Jeffrey had a ton of red zone opportunities and should get an increased amount of red zone opportunities this year. So I do see some running backs. I really love Geis right here, but I'm going to go for Josh Gordon just because I have to stick to my rankings. If I have Josh Gordon ranked as a 3rd round pick, even in standard leagues, I'm getting him in the 4th. I'm extremely happy. My next pick in the 5th round, I would love to have Darius Geis. That would be my ultimate extremely happy pick, would be Darius Geis. Alshon Jeffrey, I think, is an impeccable value in the 4th round. Keep in mind though, guys, this team looks pretty stacked right now because it is a 10-team league. Okay, all teams are going to be relatively stacked, so getting a good quarterback is going to help you. Getting really strong wide receivers and running backs is going to help you. Taking strong late round flyers on guys that realistically do have top 20 upside and avoiding those players who have more of a safe floor, that's what you're going to have to do. Tyreek Hill, Josh Gordon, those aren't really safe floor players. They have really high upside, they're not really safe floor. They're also the types of guys that make up most of their production on big plays, and in standard you want guys with big plays. Now from time to time you are going to have to settle for like a Golden Tate or a Pierre Garcon, but just make sure that those guys fall to you. You should not be targeting these guys in any way. You should not value them as safe players, not in standard. Let's say, for instance, six receptions for 70 yards is only 7 points. That's really not much in standard at all. Whereas in PPR, that's 13 points. So completely different players depending on the format. What I'm going to be looking to do here is just kind of take a peek at some of the quarterbacks available, also some of the tight ends. In a 10-team league, I do get slightly more interested in the idea of taking a quarterback or tight end early. I'll certainly not be afraid to target one in rounds 7, 8, or 9. A player who I would be targeting is going to be Cam Newton. So if I can get Cam Newton relatively early, I would still not be opposed to that. My picks coming up though, I do see Geis on the board, and I'd very much love to grab Geis as my backup plan though. I do see that we have Derrick Henry. Let's see, is that Darius Geis just got taken? Okay, so Darius Geis unfortunately got snagged right before I was able to take him. But on the bright side, I did have a backup plan, and all of you guys, when drafting, should always have a backup plan in place. My backup plan was Derrick Henry, and as we saw, Darius Geis got taken. I went to Derrick Henry. I also don't think that Rashad Penny would be a bad pick at all. If this were PPR, I would have pivoted a little bit more to Rashad Penny because, let's face it, Derrick Henry, as much as he has proven to be decent in the passing game, he's had a bunch of big plays in the passing game. They brought in Dion Lewis for a reason. Now, I'm not in the camp that thinks Dion Lewis is going to beat Derrick Henry in touches or even be close to Derrick Henry in touches. I think the split is going to favor heavily Derrick Henry, but at the same time, you have to know that in clear receiving downs, he is going to be on the field. Dion Lewis I'm speaking on. Derrick Henry will not be there. Now goal line he will be, which is great because this is standard. You're going to want a guy that's playing on the goal line. So in standard leagues, make sure you're dropping your Dion Lewis's. Make sure you are inflating the value of players like Derrick Henry. Now let's see, we have quarterbacks. Cam Newton is available. I do think it's still a little too early for Cam Newton. I can still get behind taking Carson Wentz around later. I wouldn't be opposed to taking a wide receiver here. I also wouldn't be opposed to taking a running back here. I like Rashad Penny a lot. I'm probably going to end up taking him. But I do want to mention somebody like Chris Hogan. I put him in the wide receiver bust video, and I do think he does have strong bust ability. But don't forget, in a standard league, he is much more valuable as well. I mentioned that he didn't have a single game over 78 receiving yards, 76 receiving yards, something like that during the regular season. He also didn't have more than 2 games where he was targeted over 6 times. So volume's not the name of your game. Yeah, they lost Cooks, but they're bringing in Edelman. But you don't need volume in a standard league. We saw what he was able to do with 2 or multiple multi-touchdown games. And if he's able to do anything like that, he's going to have some fantasy value for you. And if you're a player who drafted RB heavy, like I have so far, I think my current roster, I have Melvin Gordon, Leonard Fournette, Derrick Henry, Rashad Penny, to just Tyreek Hill and Josh Gordon. I really think a player like Chris Hogan could do well on this roster, because you're going to want to start Chris Hogan during those first 4 games. You're not going to be as interested in starting him once Julian Edelman's back. In a team like this, where Josh Gordon maybe started but could be a better player to have as kind of a wait and see approach, I think Chris Hogan would fit in really well for this roster. Now, Chris Hogan is still available. I would be happy to take him as my next pick. I think he's much stronger in standard than really any of these other wide receivers are. Corey Davis, I also think, is an impeccable pick in standard leagues as well, because he's the type of guy that has maybe top wide receiver 1 numbers. Now, I'm not talking top half wide receiver 1 numbers, but a wide receiver 1 type of numbers he could provide to a team, because we haven't seen it before. We know that the talent's there. One thing that's holding him back is the offense. Anybody else in this range, it realistically couldn't happen, especially in standard. Now, as much as everybody does think that Mariota is straight garbage, and let's be honest, Mariota did not perform very well, but he was one of the best quarterbacks under pressure last season. Not one, he was actually the best and most accurate quarterback while under pressure last season. And he also, the year before that, was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the red zone. So to say that Mariota can't do it is just silly, because we've seen him at times perform really well in certain areas. He does have the ability to have a season where he can put it all together. Have we seen it yet? No. But is it a possibility? Yes. And for those reasons, Corey Davis has this unknown upside that a lot of people just don't see in him. We see it in him, and I think you guys should be interested in just kind of that type of upside. Is I don't want to say a lottery pick, but just know when you're taking that pick, yeah, you do present a little bit more risk to yourself, but in return, you're really gaining a player with more upside than guys you probably grabbed a round or 2 later, or a round or 2 earlier, I should say. I'm going to take Chris Hogan here just because of the reasons I said earlier. I think that my receivers do have a lot of volatility, that being Josh Gordon and Tyreek Hill. I think I'd be a liar to say that neither one of them had bustability. Obviously, Chris Hogan does as well, but he is a guy, while I'm figuring out my roster, I can plug in for the first 4 weeks, and he can really help my team out. I would love to have Corey Davis next. I'm going to take a peek at tight ends. I really think that the value of someone like Trey Burton would outweigh the value of someone like Kyle Rudolph. As much as I love Kyle Rudolph, I think he is probably a better standard player. I don't really tend to give much variance when it comes to tight ends in standard versus tight ends in PPR. And the reason is because really tight ends are touchdown or bust no matter where you're going, unless you're getting a tight end who was used like Evan Engram last year, where he was just getting peppered targets. They're touchdown or bust. So I don't really value much more, but players much more in standard or PPR, at least when it comes to tight ends. So when I'm seeing Kyle Rudolph and I'm seeing Trey Burton, who both are going to be taken around the same area, I do think that because of Kirk Cousins' amount of weapons that he has, and because of his inefficiencies in the red zone, I really could see somebody like Trey Burton getting a lot more red zone targets than someone like Kyle Rudolph. Of course, Kirk Cousins averaged 1,100 yards and over 10 touchdowns to the tight end position over the past 3 years. But I also think that Kyle Rudolph is going to be while comparable to Jordan Reed, he's not going to compare to the weapons that he had in Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. You could say Deshaun Jackson was there, Pierre Garçon was there, but are these guys red zone weapons? No. Stephon Diggs proved he's one of the best red zone receivers in the league last year when it came to catch rate. That's something Cousins has really never had. He did start to see that with Josh Doxson, who has an insanely wide catch rate, but as we know, he's no longer in Washington, so we're never going to see that connection really come to fruition. All I'm basically saying is I could see more touchdowns possibly going to Trey Burton over Kyle Rudolph, and for those reasons, while I wouldn't, if I was given the choice between both of them and I had to pick, I would definitely pick Kyle Rudolph, but I do know that Trey Burton's going about a round later, so who am I targeting? I would probably target Trey Burton over Kyle Rudolph in a standard league in that scenario. So I picked Corey Davis and Chris Hogan. I'm going to take a pick at quarterbacks. I love having Kirk Cousins here. I think that's the next pick. Just going to take a peek at tight ends. Kyle Rudolph was taken. I'm going to try to get Kirk Cousins here and then wrap around to Trey Burton the next round. So guys, I know I don't normally take tight ends, quarterbacks and tight ends this early, but we're in a 10-team league here. You guys need to have a solid quarterback and you need to have a solid tight end, because there's going to be really good quarterbacks and really good tight ends for almost every other team in this league. Because they're able to draft so many wide receivers and so many running backs, they're bound to hit on multiple of these guys. And when you're only starting, 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and 1 flex, quarterback and tight ends really start to gain more value. So Trey Burton did end up falling, and I'm super happy about that. A player who I think you guys can, if you do miss out on a tight end in a standard league, in a 10-team league, because I think not just standard, you need to focus on tight end. It's also being a smaller league, you need to focus more on tight end. And a guy I think you can get late if you kind of missed the boat on everything, all the value kind of came to you and you didn't see the need to grab one of these guys early. I really think a player like David Njoku might be doing well, but really I think Cameron Brate is probably going to be your best bet. Now Cameron Brate, although he played on very minimal snaps last year, he was almost featured exclusively in the red zone. We saw an insane amount of red zone targets per opportunity to Cameron Brate last year. I don't think that would change at all heading into this year. They just paid him. We already spoke about how many weapons Jameis Winston's going to have at his disposal this year, and I really think it's going to come to situational opportunity. And Cameron Brate's situational opportunity is not going to lend itself well to between the 20s. What it will lend itself well to is heavily in the red zone. Like I said, I think David Njoku is a good late round flyer. I never recommend to draft 2 tight ends, but I will say David Njoku is definitely a sleeper for us. How late he's going. If you did want to take 2 tight ends, because in a 10-team league, there's going to be plenty of options on the waiver wire through the first 3 weeks. I wouldn't mind just taking a late round flyer on David Njoku, but Cameron Brate's probably going to end up being, at least excluding the first 3 weeks, we did see a significant drop off when he was playing with Ryan Fitzpatrick. So you may not even need to draft him, but don't be afraid to pick him up after the first 3 weeks that Winston's suspended, and just throw him right into your lineup, because I'm telling you, Cameron Brate, he's going to play, he's going to get red zone targets. And we said it multiple times in this video, it's TD or bust with most of these tight ends. So why don't you go for the guy who is getting plenty of red zone targets? George Kittle, I think he's a great guy. He's definitely more of a PPR guy. I think Jimmy Garoppolo's skill set much more favors players in PPR leagues. He didn't show us much efficiency in the red zone. I wouldn't necessarily expect that to change all that much. At least until I see it. Obviously, that even though we haven't seen it, that would count as upside, because if you haven't seen it, but it's still a possibility, that could be an unknown upside of George Kittle. But what we do know is what you're drafting him off of what he's done and what we believe he can do. He's a good guy in PPR that could be used between the 20s and possibly in the red zone. I am going to take a peek at running backs. I have a couple guys on my list. I really like Marquise Goodwin. I'm going to take Marquise Goodwin here. And then I'm going to look to probably take a shot on another running back. Now, when you're in standard leagues, you're just going to, when you get to this later rounds, you're just going to get a backup running back. A guy like Nick Chubb, Isaiah Crowell. These guys are great. I didn't notice Isaiah Crowell was there. He's obviously a steal at this point. I probably should have taken him over Goodwin. But a guy like Nick Chubb, Jamal Williams, Latavius Murray, all these guys that are in crowded backfields, but do have but may potentially get opportunities if one guy goes down. These are the guys you're going to want to take a shot on. I'm going to take Isaiah Crowell because he, out of all the players I just listed, already has the job given to him. Unfortunately, he's not on a good offense, but we have seen him play lights out. At least a couple years ago, we saw him be one of the best receivers in breakaway, not receivers, best running backs in breakaway percentage. He also was getting chunks and chunks at a time, and he was also running really well between and outside the tackles. So Isaiah Crowell had a really down year last year. Very surprising. Obviously, he goes from a bad offense to another bad offense, which we're not expecting a ton of goal line opportunities, but we're also not drafting him to do that either. I think there would be a case for taking Jamal Williams ahead of Isaiah Crowell because they kind of are very similar. Jamal Williams, of course, is going to be the lead back and maybe even partly the third down back while Aaron Jones is out. Aaron Jones, of course, is the better receiving running back, but they also have Ty Montgomery, so you have to think of that. So Jamal Williams is guaranteed to be the first and second down back for 2 weeks, and then he is not guaranteed to be the first and second down back after those 2 weeks. But in the meantime, he also could still lose third down opportunities to Ty Montgomery. So really what you're getting is a player who has realistically a situation where he could come into where he could get a decent amount of carries on what would be a better offense, or you could get a guy who's guaranteed the carries on a much worse offense. Now, that's a trade-off that I wouldn't really be leaning at least one way or the other at this point. I think if everything goes both players' ways, obviously Jamal Williams has much higher upside because Jamal Williams is on a much better offense. The only downside is Green Bay has been very vocal about them wanting to stick to running back by committee. You can't blame them for it. I really think that the three backs that they have lend themselves really well to a running back by committee approach. Jamal Williams is not as effective as a rusher, whereas Aaron Jones is. But Jamal Williams can also catch decently well, and Ty Montgomery, as we know, can catch extremely well. He just can't stay healthy in that situation. I'm going to take Jamal Williams here, and I think that's it for running backs. I love to go running back heavy. Actually, that's it for running backs and receivers. I'm done. Let's see. So 10-team leagues, they go pretty fast, guys. But you can just see all of these players that are still here. Nick Chubb's still not even drafted. That's just a travesty. But as you can see in 10-team leagues, guys, look at all this talent still left on the board. That's why it's going to be important to get a quarterback and a running back. You know, you don't have to take them with your last two picks like normal. Get a guy that you think has possible top 5 upside. Kirk Cousins, as much as you guys want to bash Kirk Cousins, he's been in the top 10 for numerous years. He's changing teams. That's going to add to his risk factor. He doesn't really have a bunch of weapons that he is familiar with, and he's already inefficient in the red zone. We know all of these things about Kirk Cousins, but let's just say if everything goes his way, he plays well in the red zone. And Now he doesn't have Jordan Reed, who's always unhealthy, who's always injured. Now he has Kyle Rudolph, who's going to be there for him. Now he has Stephon Diggs, one of the best red zone receivers in the league last year. Now he has possibly and arguably one of the better slot receivers he's had in Adam Thielen. So if everything goes his way, Kirk Cousins could be a top 5 guy. Of course, we'd like him to rush more, but he's been getting 4, 5, 6 rushing touchdowns per year, relatively consistently. Trey Burton, that's an upside guy. Like I said, if Trey Burton doesn't work out, not too worried. We got Cameron Brate, but I did want to get a guy at least relatively early. I didn't sacrifice too much of my depth to do so, considering that I have enough receivers to be okay if anyone were to go down, and plenty of running backs. I think I overdid it on running backs, some people would say. But overall, I think that this team is really well balanced. Let me take a look. I do have to still get a defense. And the New Orleans Saints are there. As much as I love the New Orleans Saints, I can't take them over Baltimore. I put out a tweet and I just said I don't normally have strong takes on fantasy defenses, but realistically, if there's any one defense I could see breaking its way into a top 5 defense this season, I think that it's the New Orleans Saints. They were really good last year. They played a little bit inconsistent at times, but one of the best things you can do for a team is to have a number 1 shutdown corner. Marshawn Lattimore is that guy. So he's going to be shutting down the best receiver, leaving the defense to really do most of the heavy lifting itself after that fact. Now, even though I think New Orleans Saints could be top 5 this year, could realistically do that, I could never take them over Baltimore. I think Baltimore is already a top 5 defense. So Baltimore is good. Obviously, New Orleans is, like last year, I was targeting the Eagles with everyone that I could. New Orleans is going to be the one I'm targeting in every league. If you guys are in those really deep leagues and you just want a guy you want a defense that's just going undrafted, go for the New York Giants. Don't forget, they were a top defense 2 years ago and lost no pieces. Okay, they had a little hiccup, they had a little shake-up with their coaching staff, but they're going to come back this year. They're switching to a 3-4 defense, which lends itself really well to fantasy players or fantasy performances from a defensive perspective. So if you guys need that, if you're in a 16-team league and people are drafting 2 defenses and the top 20 is already gone, just go ahead and take the New York Giants defense, and if it doesn't work out, you can stream. Let's break down my team now. So I talked a lot about Kirk Cousins, told you what I think about him. I think he has top 5 upside. I think at worst he's like quarterback 10. Tyreek Hill, Josh Gordon. We have Chris Hogan, Corey Davis, Marquise Goodwin. A lot of bustability, not gonna lie. I think Josh Gordon and Tyreek Hill, as much as they have high upside, they really do present some risk. For one, Tyreek Hill is not a volume guy, but he's also been basically a wide receiver 1 in points per game, at least since he's been given the opportunity. That shouldn't change regardless of who the quarterback is. I think Tyreek Hill is still one of the better receivers you can get in standard, so don't forget that. Now, Josh Gordon, on the other hand, he does make big chunk plays. Now, we do want to say that makes better usage for standard, but at the same time, we can't really expect his scoring opportunities to be all that high. I think when it comes to the red zone, it's going to mostly be a combination of Josh Gordon and David Njoku for who garners the most red zone targets. So all we can do is hope that the red zone targets are there. If he's a guy who ends up this season with like 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns, which I think is realistic for Josh Gordon, if he plays all 16, of course, then you're going to be completely happy regardless of standard or PPR. And I think that he is a great person to have in the 3rd round, and if you can get him in the 4th like I did, even better. Chris Hogan, I mentioned. If Josh Gordon's just not looking to be as involved as we would like, at least heading into the season, or if any of these running backs just aren't looking to really pan out, Chris Hogan's a guy I would look to be getting into my flex early in the first 4 games. while Julian Edelman's suspended. And as we know, Chris Hogan is not a volume guy. In PPR, volume is king. And if you're going to rely on a receiver, especially one in the early to mid rounds, he needs to have the volume. Tyreek Hill, of course, not being one of those guys, presents risk. Chris Hogan, on the other hand, he's not one of those guys. He presents risk. But he's also, his involvement is heavily in the red zone. He had the multi-touchdown games. So in standard, he would definitely be one of those guys that gets a slight bump up. Corey Davis, on the other hand, he is a guy who we have been targeting. I think he's in that Sammy Watkins range. This one kind of relies heavily on the improvement of Marcus Mariota. I didn't draft Corey Davis to play in the first few weeks. I didn't even draft Corey Davis, if all goes right, to play in the first 8 weeks. Corey Davis has a really tough schedule for the first 7 weeks, and then a much better schedule after his bye week. If I could manage to hang on to Corey Davis for the first half of the season, he should be a stud once the schedule actually lends itself for him to play better and for Mariota to see improvements. So he's a guy who I'd be looking to hold on to, who has basically unmatched upside than any other guy on this list or in this roster. Marquise Goodwin, on the other hand, he is the deep threat guy. He's the bye week fill-in. He's the guy who was actually playing, I believe it was wide receiver 17 as soon as Jimmy Garoppolo was there. There was no Pierre Garçon on the team at that time. Did he do enough to gain Garoppolo's trust? That's going to be a big question. But again, he's my wide receiver 5. He's not going to need to be starting. So at this point, really just having him there and being that bye week fill-in, being that guy who I can start if he just has an incredible matchup and all my other guys just have terrible matchups or are injured. He's going to be that guy that I can really rely on mostly. Let's take a look at the running backs. We have Melvin Gordon, Leonard Fournette. I don't think I need to say much more about those. Those guys are two studs there. Derrick Henry, I really like that as my RB3. He is another guy who you could see finishing in the top 12, regardless of how much volume that Dion Lewis is taking. In a standard league, yards are yards. So the PPR points, even though he's not going to get 50, 60 receptions, if he's getting the touchdowns or being involved in the red zone every time the Titans make it over to that area of the field, he's going to have immense value. He's much higher in my rankings in standard than he is in PPR for obvious reasons. So to have him as an RB3 who will likely probably see the bench, especially for the first couple weeks of the season, that's going to be good to just hold on to him because, like I said, their schedule is not the easiest schedule. I also want to have and give myself an opportunity to see how both Dion Lewis and Derrick Henry play together. So he's going to be on the bench, and I'm fine with that. Like I said, I have Chris Hogan or my next running back, which is Rashad Penny, who he's kind of the opposite. He's going to get an incredible amount of touches. Now, the only problem is we are not sure how valuable those touches are going to be. It's behind a bad offensive line, and it's historically been, or at least recently, it's been a team that has thrown rather than ran in the red zone. Now, that's clearly a result of the situation that they were in. We saw Jimmy Graham given like 8 targets inside the 5, and those targets would more than likely translate to Rashad Penny rushes. They would tend to rush in those, first and 5, second and 5 situations rather than throw to Jimmy Graham. Obviously, it didn't work well for them in the Super Bowl, but when you don't have a good offensive line and you don't have any capable running backs, that's what you were doing. Now in Seattle, they're going to look to fix that this year. They're going to try to run more, and Rashad Penny is going to get loaded with targets, loaded with rushes, and basically to have a guy as your 4th running back who is probably going to be top 15 in total touches, I mean, how can you really be upset with that? Lastly, my 2 flyers, Isaiah Crowell, Jamal Williams. These guys both have different situations when it comes to their opportunities and their offenses. really different situations. Isaiah Crowell is guaranteed to get the touches in certain situations on his team. Jamal Williams is only guaranteed stuff for the first couple games. Now, both of them present upside, but I'm going to take the wait and see approach with both of these players. Lastly, I have my kicker, Jake Elliott. You always want a kicker on a good team that puts up points. The Eagles, they're a good team. They put up points. If there's any regression on this team, especially in scoring, that's going to benefit myself and my kicker. So having Jake Elliott, I think, is probably one of the better kickers you can get in the league. Obviously, it's a kicker. You really won't be afraid to drop him in 5 weeks. You won't be afraid to drop him in 2 weeks. There's always going to be somebody out there. It's definitely a position that you can stream. But I really just like having Jake Elliott on this team. I'm an Eagles fan too, so obviously anytime I can get an Eagles player, I love it. New Orleans Saints, I already mentioned them enough before and earlier. I really do think you guys can take this one away and grab New Orleans Saints defense. I really like them better than the Broncos this year. I'm not even kidding. I'll come out with my defensive rankings and maybe make a video on it, because I do not normally give out takes on defenses, but I do also think that this year people have it really wrong. They're ranking these defenses like the Chiefs defense, the Seahawks defense, the Broncos defense. They're ranking them way too high based on past performance. Yeah, these teams have had really good defenses, you know, in the past 5 years, but they're not the same defenses. Aqib Talib's gone for the Broncos. Like, the quarterback situation's different. The game flow is going to be different. The game script's going to be different. So I really think that the rankings of the defenses are wrong, and maybe it's worth making a video on, but we'll talk more about that later. As for now, New Orleans Saints, I think it's a great target for you guys. If you guys do have them on your board late and you get them as like the 10th or 11th defense off the board, you just basically got a steal. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. If you really enjoyed it, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.